I would like to invite up Reverend Karin once again. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. That was fantastic. So I've just got a little bit of a glitch here with my iPad. Try and get this thing to work. There we go. Of course it works perfectly now. That's great, because that's how it always is. So good. So this month, we're in a new month. I love new months because it's like a tiny little new beginning every single time it happens. The beginning of the new year is always a big deal. And then it's like, oh, new month. I get to start again. Got kind of tired of the last month. It was filled with a lot of rain, some flooding. I'm like, I'm going into flood country next week. I'm knowing that they're done with that. They're done with that. So June in our teaching this month, we're going to be focusing on accountability. And so the phrase that we're using for accountability is we account for our activities, we disclose them in a transparent manner, and accept responsibility for our actions and obligations as well. And we entrust in the universe in supporting us in doing that. So accountability is really quite a critical part of our teaching. Another way of looking at it is personal responsibility. Another way of looking at it is self-reliance. So if we know that everything that is happening, and we're a part of a creative expression of everything that is happening, we get to actually look at it and say, what part am I playing in what is happening? And where do I have an opportunity to change my consciousness around those particular things? So we may think that we don't have any role to play, but often that's not the case. Often there is some area in whatever situation we're focused on, that we can actually activate a different part of ourselves to change that expression. So this comes to really where we're talking about living the impeccable word. How many of you have read the 4 Agreements? Okay, so about half of you. So I'm going to go through just a little quick summary so we can all literally get on the same page of that. So the 4 Agreements is a book that came out quite a while ago now. I didn't realize it was so long ago. It was 1997. So that's, 20 years ago now. Hard to believe. And by Don Miguel Ruiz, who is of Mexican origin but now lives in the United States. And it focuses on Toltec wisdom. And the other time that Toltec wisdom came into, the sort of North American awareness was with Carlos Castaneda in the 1960s. He was an anthropologist. He went down to Mexico, went into the Toltec area. Tulum is one of those areas, and ended up meeting up with a guy named Don Juan. Some people say he was fictional. At one point, he became defrocked from Berkeley University. And so there's a bit of a discussion around whether or not any of this is real or imaginary. But I think that there's enough consistency with the Toltec philosophy that, it doesn't matter. It's ancient wisdom. Wisdom is wisdom. It doesn't really matter where it comes from. And so if there's truth in it, I'm open to it. So this book, Toltec wisdom, goes back actually to about the 900 to 12th century Mexico. So it predates the Aztec period. And the indigenous community, some of them still subscribe to this. So what Don Miguel Ruiz did was he came out with a book called The 4 Agreements, and he sort of distilled down some of the general philosophies that he took. There's many agreements, and he sort of said, these are the 4 critical ones that we need to look at. And he has a lot to say just about the way that we make agreements with ourselves, which in turn has a lot to speak about our language and the words that we use. Particularly important for our teaching, and I will show you how those 2 concepts and 2 ideas dovetail together. So one of the things that he talks about is that the 4 agreements are, first of all, be impeccable with your word, which is the one we're going to focus on today. The second one is don't take anything personally, which is always an interesting one to follow. The third one, which is what Reverend Laura Lee is going to be speaking with you about, is don't make assumptions. That's a good one. And the very last one is always do your best, which is sort of a nice way, a nice little segue for the co-creation, which is part of us bringing our conscious awareness towards what it looks like when we do our best and how we can actually actualize that. So what Don Miguel Ruiz said was he talked a little bit about the Toltecs, and he said that when we come into this world, he talks about the dreaming that we have, and that we have our sleeping dreaming, but that we have our living dreaming as well. And some people in Western philosophy, you can hear the same sort of idea that what we're looking at in the external world is really an illusion. And what he calls it is it's a dream. And as he goes through explaining what that dream is, he says what our dream is it's actually comprised of a whole bunch of very small agreements that we have been making with the world in terms of like, I'll agree that the world works like this. And we've taken on in the beginning what those agreements are. We've taken them from our parents. We've taken them from our teachers. We've taken them from our cultural background. We've taken them from our societal background. Maybe we've taken them from our collective consciousness around what our country is, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And as we get older, we buy into these different belief systems, is what we would call it in Science of Mind, or he says we buy into these different agreements that we make in terms of how the world works. And if we want to have constructive, positive change happening in our lives, we actually need to break the agreements that we've made up to this point to reactivate and free ourselves so that we can make new positive agreements. So this is where you can see where the connection is. So when we talk about affirmations and things like that, that in turn is a way of making a positive agreement, a new agreement with our life, and we get to move forward from that place. Does that make sense? With me on that? So what he says is fear controls the outside dream. So, you look at what's going on in the world right now, man, you can't talk to anybody right now without them going into fear, probably by the second sentence. Doesn't matter. The floods, right? The floods, climate change, what's going on in the United States, what's not going on in the United States, what's going on because somebody might be in the United States, et cetera, et cetera. Like, it's crazy. You cannot get anywhere without it being into that place of fear. And so what he says, though, which I just love, this is a quote from him. He says, death is not our biggest fear. Our biggest fear is taking the risk to be alive. Death is not our biggest fear. Conflict is not our biggest fear. Our biggest fear is taking the risk to be alive. Ralph Waldo Emerson said exactly the same kind of thing in his book, Self-Reliance, which was part of the Transcendentalist movement and formed part of the foundation of this teaching. And he talked a lot about the power that resides within each one of us to be self-reliant, and that power is a universal power. It's available to everybody, regardless of apparent circumstances. And we know this to be true because it doesn't matter where we go, we always find exceptions to the rule. Always. So which one is the rule? Is the rule the one that says 90% of people are never going to get out of this situation? Or is the rule the one 10% are going to get out, and those 10% have figured out how to make it work? Why do we always want to defer to the 90%? Just a question. Just a question. Because my feeling, though, is that when we defer to the 10%, it calls on us to be just ever so slightly, or even quite a bit, and Kelly spoke to this in her treatment, more alive than we were when we started our day. So what if every single day we begin our day by saying, you know what, today is actually better already, right now. And everything that I do today will take me further and further into a consciousness that is connected with the divine spirit and the divine attributes of peace and love and connection and community and expansion and oneness. It's a long list. It's a long, long list. So this thing about what we're supposed to be and who we're supposed to be, he calls that the domestication. We've been domesticated like animals. And if any of you remember elementary school, a lot of it, I think, had to do with domestication, right? Everybody has to stand in a line. Everybody has to do this. Everybody has to do that. And they've broken through some of that stuff, right? But not all of it. There is still a lot of domestication. And some of the messages that we get when we're in that particularly new stage of our lives become messages that we ingrain in ourselves and believe about ourselves and make an agreement on for far, far longer. So the story that he gives is a story of a mother who's at home, has had a really difficult day at work. She's exhausted. She's tired. And her little 5-year-old or 4-year-old, you know what they're like, right? They are full of beans. They just never stop. They just keep going and going and going. And it doesn't really matter what's happening for anybody else. And they're just full of life. And oddly, even as they're full of life, sometimes for someone who's not feeling so full of life, that can actually be really, really irritating, right? Which is kind of, instead of saying, oh, I'll take some of that, it's like, get away from me. Get away from me. It's too much life. Too much. So this mother, in this horrible state of, whatever, angst and anxiety and just overworked and all the rest of it, basically says, shut up. You've got an ugly voice. Just shut up. And all that little kid hears is, you've got an ugly voice. That child was singing in that moment. What do you think happened to that possibility of any future singing? What do you think may have happened to the possibility of being able to stand up and with the fullness of who she is, speak her word? Maybe a little more quiet now. So there was an agreement that was made in that moment within the consciousness of that little child that said, my voice is ugly. I need to dampen myself down a bit. I need to be quiet. And so the life continues and the consciousness continues until such a point that they're now 25 and they say, I don't understand why I just don't feel like I'm, have a voice. Why don't I have a voice? And then that's when we start to say, because you need to examine what agreement you made. You need to examine what did you buy into, what false construct, what false belief did you buy into, and now make a new agreement. Redefine who you are. And the irony is that mother in that moment probably had no intention, no idea of what was created then. There was no maliciousness. It was just a bad day and a bad moment. But there's the impeccability of the word. We have no idea on the other side how powerful our words are, how tremendously powerful they are, and the impact that they may have on the other, in addition to the impact that they have on ourselves. So one of the really good things that Ernest Holmes talks about is that we need to remind ourselves that every word, that everything that we're saying is a prayer. This is from Meister Eckhart as well. He says, we are constantly praying, which sounds funny because normally we think, oh, no, we set aside prayer for those times when, we feel like a real need. And so prayer is over here, and then there's the rest of my life. And maybe I only do a prayer once a year. Maybe I never pray. But that's not the way it actually works. What Meister Eckhart says and what Ernest Holmes says is that prayer is a constant thing. And it comes through the words that we use, how we choose to use them, and what we are activating in our lives. So sometimes when we get into our meditation moments, we start to hear that little voice with some clarity, and we don't like it because it's saying things like, "You're not good enough," or "I can't do that," or "That's beneath me." That's another thing too, maybe, that we do. Or "I'm not worthy," or "I'm not enough." And the universe says yes. The universe says yes, because that's how it works. We put out our word, and the universe supports it. And we put out our word, and the universe supports it. When we start changing our word, when we start changing our expression and our experience, the universe will start to reflect something different coming back to us. It always works from within, as I said in my treatment earlier. It looks like it works from without, but it starts here. The causative nature of who we are starts within each and every one of us. And so when we are impeccable with our word, then we are in that place of being able to actualize the positive gifts. So it also speaks to how we speak about others. So I'm going to go back to, that guy in the United States down there, just for a second. So if you listen to anybody who's speaking about that, and I sort of put a few little things in here, people talk about what he does, who he is, what he says, and it increasingly infects our thinking with the fact that this one person has a power over each and every one of us. It's gotten so intense here in Canada that sometimes you'd think he was our prime minister. Sometimes people forget that actually we have our own prime minister. This isn't political. I'm just talking about our language here. We forget. We have allowed this consciousness to infect us so much that we are forgetting the truth of what is really going on. And the truth in our ability to hold that as a consciousness as opposed to something else. The other thing that is important about it is that there is a way that even if we speak about something in the negative, we give more power to it to continue to increase because we elevate that kind of consciousness. So the same is true if we speak about, a certain political leader. It doesn't matter where in the world they are. If we speak about that in negative terms, we don't have a personal relationship with that person. And yet we've got full of opinions about what might be driving it, what might be doing this, what might be doing the other. And interestingly, we can do the same thing with other people in our lives as well. That's called gossip. It's called gossip. And we talk about that and we infect potential relationships by doing that. It's another way of creating the same thing. And so if we really, really want to embrace the whole idea of being impeccable with our word, then we use a number of tools. We may use things like silence, right? Silence. I think there was an old term, right? If you can't say anything nice, don't say anything at all. Can't say anything constructive, don't say anything at all. Silence can be good. Silence also gets us to go back into what's really going on. What is it within me that is even feeling the need to respond, to communicate? I want to communicate good. I want to communicate clarity. I want to communicate love. I want to communicate wisdom. I want to communicate forward movement. So someone comes at you with, negativity, and it's like, well, what would you like to do about that? How would you like to see it differently? Maybe there is another way of seeing it. Or maybe it's as simple as, I don't know, not for me to know that one. And we just neutralize. Sometimes that can work as well. So there are ways our opinions matter, and our ability to activate and work for change matters, but it also matters where we're coming from. Are we coming from that place of conflict, or are we coming from that place of peace? The results will be different. the results will be different. So he says our misuse of the word takes us further into the hell of our thinking. It's an interesting way of looking at things. So Ernest Holmes says that when we're using our words, we need to remind ourselves of who we really are. We need to remind ourselves of the power that we are, and we need to remind ourselves that we are divinely connected to that power on a regular basis. He says our thought is our involution. So it begins with our thought, and then that in turn activates the creativity that comes after that. So there's the involution, the taking in, that is our thought, and then we get the outward, the external, and we move from that place. What I really liked was a quote here where he talks about practitioners, and I know you've been introduced to Kelly and Janet as practitioners, and I'm a practitioner as well. But the truth is that we're all practitioners, just like Meister Eckhart says, because every thought, as we said, is a prayer, and so we are constantly practicing. We are practicing what we are preaching, whether we are conscious of it or not conscious of it. So what he says, so include yourselves in this, do not create a separation, include yourselves. He says when practitioners think or give a treatment or make a prayer, they are dealing with involution, the first step of the creative order. This is what the Bible calls the Word. In the beginning, there was the Word. That's how sacred the Word is. It is a sacred gift that we have. Think about the animal kingdom. They don't have this gift to the same level. I believe they do have many gifts, but they don't have the gift to the same level, perhaps, as we do. And our level of complexity is so extreme that it's easy for us to get tripped up in our words. They're so much more clear sometimes than we are. Our ability to differentiate, our ability to discern what is precisely the right word is magnificent. It is a magnificent God-given ability. So I want to just end us here with the treatment from Ernest Holmes, which shows how to use, it's from his chapter, How to Use It. And I want to take you through this if I can. If you have a copy of this book, which is an amazing book, you will be able to read it for yourself. So I'm just going to move over. Actually, I'm not going to move over here because of the mic. I'm just going to do this. Make sure I've got as much light as I can get. Okay, so close your eyes. And take these words in if you choose. I am a center in the divine mind, a point of God-conscious life, truth, and action. My affairs are divinely guided and guarded into right action, into correct results. Everything I do, say, or think is stimulated by the truth. There is power in this word that I speak, because it is of the truth, and it is the truth. There is perfect and continuous right action in my life and my affairs. All belief in wrong action is dispelled and made negative. Right action alone has power, and right action is power. And power is God, the living Spirit Almighty. This Spirit animates everything that I do, say, or think. Ideas come to me daily, and these ideas are divine ideas. They direct me and sustain me without effort. I am continually directed. And so I give thanks for this, and thanks for this moment of sharing absolute clarity of the impeccable word and the impeccable power. And so it is. So thank you, everybody. Thank you very much.